the law is very clear that it is only if the complaint at the time of filing is known to be untrue or false, only that is a false or a malicious complaint or a frivolous complaint, right? So there is really no reason for women to fear the repercussions of an unproven complaint. Good day, listeners and viewers. Welcome to this episode of the POSHpod. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, my name is Bishen Jeswant. I'm a partner at Cyril Amarchand, a lawyer working in the space of employment and labor laws, specializing in the law around sexual harassment at the workplace. With me is Laxmi Char, co-founder of Parity Consulting, an organization that works especially in the diversity and inclusion space in workplaces. This episode, we will be discussing something that comes up a lot when we discuss sexual harassment laws, because there's a fear amongst some people and of what is a false and frivolous complaint. And I think there are two extremes of people you will find on the spectrum. One, men who are now so scared to talk to women because they're worried there'll be a false and frivolous complaint, while at the other end of the spectrum is people unable to recognize the impact that maybe this has of a false and frivolous complaint being raised. The reality probably lies somewhere in the middle, and let's discuss today what the law has for us about this issue and how can we tackle it.
So, Bishen, coming to the chase, right? Section 14, which covers, and I'm using words interchangeably, false, frivolous, fraudulent, malicious, but specifically the Act says that there is a punishment applicable to a complaint that has been found to be false or frivolous. The Act also says, Bishen, that that such malice has to be found during the inquiry, right? It's not that a particular complaint is defined as a malicious complaint simply because it is a particular person making it, or that it is made against a particular person, or even, and in my experience, unfortunately, we've seen this, where this concept of malicious complaint is attached to a complaint that is raised approximately during time of performance evaluation, where there is that pushback that, the only reason she's complaining is because I gave her a bad rating, right? But the Act is pretty clear when it defines what the false and frivolous complaint is.
True. And among the various circumstances, even if the complaint is proven to be not true, that doesn't make it a false and frivolous complaint either, right? It's not just the circumstances, who filed against whom. Even if all that doesn't pass muster and ultimately the complaint is found to be false or untrue, that still doesn't make it a frivolous or a malicious complaint, right? So what is a malicious complaint then? And that's one of the reasons why women don't raise complaints, is because there is a fear that if their complaint is found to be not true, they will look like the wrongdoer over here, right? And the law is very clear that it is only if the complaint at the time of filing is known to be untrue or false, only that is a false or a malicious complaint or a frivolous complaint, right? So there is really no reason for women to fear the repercussions of an unproven complaint, because the reality is the nature of sexual harassment is such that it happens in confined spaces, isolated spaces. There may not always be proof of the sexual harassment having happened. You cannot always have a CCTV camera just in the right place to catch what has happened, right? So sexual harassment complaints by their very nature are often he said, she said kind of situations.
True.
And there is still a standard that the internal committee needs to meet to arrive at a conclusion of guilt. And that standard is lower than in a criminal case where it is beyond reasonable doubt. In an internal committee investigation, it is preponderance of probabilities or balance of convenience, as we call it, which basically means that the internal committee must think that the chances that what the complainant is saying has happened is more likely to have happened than not, right? That's still a 51% chance that it's happened. So it's a reasonable standard, not beyond reasonable doubt, but a reasonable standard. So it's possible that the complaint doesn't meet those thresholds because there is no evidence. That does not make it a false, frivolous, or malicious complaint. And I think that's something which everyone needs to be extremely clear about, and that should not put people off from filing complaints.
We actually spoke about this in one of our earlier conversations, Bishen, when we talked about the importance of evidence, how do I collect it, how do I present it, and exactly to your point that a lot of women hesitate raising the complaint because the conversation goes, Laxmi, I know that this happened, but I'm the only one who knows because I don't have a witness, right? I don't have that ability. And therefore, there is that shrinking from, do I really want to go in and submit to an investigation, an inquiry, sometimes even an interrogation, right? But the Act says the inability to substantiate the complaint by itself does not make it a malicious or a fraudulent complaint. And like you said, those, the two extremes, there's also a perception that once a complaint is made, then there is an automatic guilt associated with the respondent, right? There is an automatic reputational harm is the term that you've used with me earlier, that there is something that there is a ding, if you like, against that person. And that's really where the balancing act comes into play. We know there are not enough complaints being registered, even though the incidents happen. We know that complaints registered go through a pretty robust investigation, whether it is IC or outside. And we also know that the chances of finding somebody officially guilty versus reputationally guilty is much lower, right? So why do you think the Act even bothered having a provision like this?
The reason for it, Laxmi, is some of the things that you have just said, right? Because of the impact that it has on the individual. And I don't know even if we've not seen it in our day-to-day life, I'm sure we've heard of instances of sexual harassment having had an impact on people. I don't know if you watched the movie Aitraz from 2005 or 6 or whatever it is, or the movie Disclosure, which is what Aitraz is based on. Yeah. You've seen false complaints being made against individuals, the consequences of that, right? They have lost their jobs, they have lost their reputation in society, they find it hard to get another job, right? You have, in very extreme cases, you have seen as recently as 2018, I think it was, when an employee, I can't take company names, but it is in the public domain in 2018, IT company, look it up, employee committed suicide because they were in the midst of a sexual harassment investigation, which apparently was a false and frivolous investigation. As part of a suicide note, you understood what had actually happened there, and dying declarations are considered to be true in law. So the chances that that note is true is more than it's not. So you have instances in reality on a day-to-day basis where there is an impact ranging up to death of the individual because of the reputational harm that a sexual harassment complaint has against you. So that's where it comes from. The reason for having the clause, having a provision in the Act which says if you make a frivolous or malicious complaint, you will be punished, comes from the fact that doing this frivolously can impact lives, right? It's not every legislation in India which has a provision on frivolous complaints, but the legislature thought that it was fit to have such a provision in the sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment law in India because of the sensitive nature of the subject, right? But I want to, in the very same breath, say that should not put women off from making complaints, because, like we said earlier, you are only found to have made a false or frivolous complaint if it is proven to be false or frivolous. And there is a standard of proof to be achieved to prove that as well. In the same way as to prove sexual harassment, you have to prove that on a balance of convenience. To prove that there was a malicious complaint, that has to also be proven on a balance of convenience, right? So there has to be a 51% chance at least, for convenience of this conversation, 51% chance at least the IC must feel that this complaint is frivolous or malicious. Only then will you be found guilty of having made a frivolous complaint. So let that not put women off. So there is a balance to be drawn here, no doubt, but I think it's an important balance to have.
Yes, and the balance, kind of referring to one of our earlier conversations around the whole Me Too movement, because it's almost like a mirror situation, right? You've got a bunch of primarily women, but bunch of vulnerable people who said nobody listened to us when we said that we were being harassed. And over here you have the other situation where you have the men saying, why would you believe that I did something so terrible and horrible, and therefore the consequences of that. From a legislature perspective, and I want to really separate out the social lens, right? Stick with very, very objectively the legal lens. From a legal perspective, how does this provision support the spirit of the Act? The spirit is very clear that women in workplaces tend to be the majority of sexual harassment victims. So let's protect them, right? And yet you have a provision like this, which, exactly like you said, can be twisted to read against the women. So why do you think the legislature felt that there was value in having this balancing act?
I think, Laxmi, the answer is our earlier discussion. The value is that you see the impact of such complaints on people, right? And the impact can be quite significant. It can range from loss of reputation to loss of job to loss of life. Those are significant consequences. And to protect against such consequences when the person is innocent is why the provision is there, right? And in fact, this is the legislature's intent. And in recent times, there's an Anita Suresh case, Delhi High Court, 2018 or 19, when the court has actually found complainant to have made a false complaint and has passed an order requiring the complainant to pay 50,000 rupees because that complaint was filed merely because some work that she was supposed to do was picked up by somebody else, which made her look bad at her job, something like that, and allowed the employer to take action against her for filing a false complaint. Now, and this is one of the very few cases, right, that there are. So the point is, the provision is there, but it is not that courts are passing orders left, right and center against the women over here. It is in very remote situations. So which is why a woman raising a complaint should not be put off by it. It is only if you have genuinely filed a false complaint, and I don't think anybody will support the filing of a complaint knowing it to be false, right? So it is only in that very remote situation that an employee is actually going to be found guilty. So it shouldn't really put people off, because it's very hard to arrive at that conclusion.
Oh my God, yes, it is very, very hard. And speaking on behalf of Parity, having had a couple of situations where the respondent during the investigation has raised this as the issue, right? And said, hey, committee, the only reason she's raising the complaint against me is because she wants to take revenge against me, or, she has something, she holds a grudge against me, and this is her way of playing it out. And from the IC's perspective, we really had to be extremely objective and careful. And you guided us in one of the earlier conversations we had. Season 1, folks, go check it out. Where you talked about the value of evidence, the value of, bringing voices together, corroboratory, circumstantial, all of that. We really had to pay a lot of attention to the process, which was really important, and to parse all of the information that we were receiving to ensure that we were not either, taking the complainant's word at face value or the respondent's word at face value, because it would be easier to do. And I think that's where, again, this is something that you mentioned, where the value of the IC comes into play, right? I mean, how well trained are they? How capable are they? How mature are they? And most important, from an employer's perspective, does the organization have an IC which inspires trust and confidence in the people? Because when we were faced, and speaking on behalf of, Parity, when we were faced with a situation like this, we really spent a lot of time. I know it says 90 days, it doesn't say how many hours, but we spent a ton of time, ensuring that we understood the nitty-gritties of the case. And we were able to guide the recommendations in a way that did not allow for any misconception of the false and frivolous thing. So what would your kind of thumb rule / advice / guidance be if something like this pops up, right? If somebody says, and in one case we had the respondent who said that, in another case it was a witness who said, oh, I know these two people, they are, they were in a relationship earlier, that relationship no longer exists, and now this is the result. So
you mean, how will you find the person guilty of having made a frivolous or false complaint,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So how do we take that into consideration?
Most often you won't be able to find, right? Which is why I was making the point earlier that women should not be put off by it. Merely because I don't have footage or I don't have evidence, that's not a false complaint. When is it a false complaint? The case I cited earlier, the Anita Suresh case, the Delhi High Court case, that was a case where, if I'm not wrong, she said that person X made some comments about me in the presence of 4 or 5 people. Each of those 5 people said no, he said nothing, right? So they've all, she named them as witnesses, saying they viewed this incident, but when they were asked, they said nothing happened. In the same case, I think another allegation that she made was that he took me to the bathroom alone, which was inappropriate. But the witnesses to that said what had happened was, he had reported that in the bathroom the soap had gotten over and she was a superior, and he had taken her to the bathroom to show her that the soap was over, is what the witnesses said. I may be getting some other facts a little bit wrong, but those are the broad facts. So unless there is clear evidence to say that there has been something wrong in the complaint here, the woman will not be found guilty of having made a false or malicious complaint. Okay. So an IC needs to look out for strong evidence to really state that. And if that evidence is not there, the complaint is not a frivolous complaint. Simple. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It is not a false complaint. So ICs don't need to go looking for it, right? Really. So you don't need to test each complaint for its whether it's true or not. Yeah. So if strong evidence comes, you can hold it, but you don't need to go hunting for it.
That's an interesting point, and kind of relates back to some of the conversations that I have with our clients when we are setting up ICs, when we are discussing training and stuff, and I talk about how there are inbuilt provisions in the POSH Act to kind of create that sense of support and respect for the respondent as well. So you mentioned it, no anonymous complaints. So that's kind of in a way protecting the respondent from frivolous complaints, right? Because anonymous complaints could be frivolous. And then this is another provision. So interesting. Thank you. It's really good always to kind of parse the Act. And last words from you, Bishen.
So the POSH Act, I think the best way to make sure that there are no false and frivolous complaints is, one, redress matters quickly, right? So when does a false complaint become an issue? It's a false complaint leads to loss of reputation when a matter is hanging for a long period of time. If the matters are resolved quickly, there isn't enough time. If a person is eventually found innocent, and our example here only talks about that, if he is found guilty, then there is no false complaint, right? True. If a person is found innocent, that intervening period is when there is that loss of reputation, loss of face and all of that.
Sure.
As you close that gap as much as you can by having investigations done quickly, not allowing it to prolong beyond the prescribed timelines, you reduce the incentive to file frivolous complaints as well. You take it out of the picture. True. That's one. And I have another point to make, which is a, far-fetched ideological kind of point maybe. But the reason why frivolous complaints are an issue is our mentality. As human beings, we have come to accept that you are innocent until proven guilty for things like financial fraud, insider trading, right? You are willing to say that until the court finds them guilty, we won't hang them. But for issues like sexual harassment, rape, we tend to put a black mark on the individual's character well before there is a decision. As public, right? So as public, if we don't think of individuals as guilty or in some way disreputable just because there is an allegation against them, there is again no reason to file a complaint, right? Why will someone file a frivolous complaint against you if it's not going to have any impact on the organization or the individual? But that's, I mean, when will mentality change? There is no way to know, but it has changed with respect to some kinds of offences. Maybe it will change eventually with respect to offences like this as well, at which point there will be no point of making a frivolous complaint and this provision in the Act will be left redundant, which is what we eventually want it to be.
We hope that it'll get there as our culture evolves and changes. But you did bring a very interesting point, which is let's make sure that we handle complaints as quickly as possible. And I'd love to talk to you maybe on another day about how to keep this information confidential, because that's another variable in terms of finding or reputational harm for people. And so, audiences, over to you. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share, and talk to us. Come back and ask us questions. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you as always.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.